Weird trends from the Middle Ages that have us scratching our heads. If you need perspective on your modern-day concerns, be grateful that you didn't have to live through the tumultuous and strange Middle Ages. People were still figuring out the whole being human experience in Europe, and in the process, engaged in some pretty weird traditions, from odd thoughts on moles and freckles to gross alternative hair sources. Here are the strangest trends from the medieval era that we're glad never stuck. Since their marriages were for political gain, people of the court needed some outlet to express their feelings of romance. This was courtly love, a system that allowed the royals to show affection for their crushes while remaining married. The most popular way to resolve a serious spousal dispute in Germany was trial by single combat. The unhappy couple went into a ring and fought each other, while following another bizarre set of rules for fighting. Whatever works, we guess. Animals were held to the same judicial process as humans. If they were accused of a crime, they had a trial. If they were convicted of their crime, they were sentenced to death by either being burnt at the stake or hanging. This hopefully taught the animals that crime doesn't pay. Rich people loved to show off their wealth by wearing fancy clothes. For instance, European men had a period in which they all wore long, pointed shoes. The lengthiest shoes were stiffened by whalebone to hold their shape. Medieval women hated hair. They saw their foreheads as their faces' central attraction. To draw more attention to this feature, some would pluck their eyebrows and eyelashes. The most devoted even plucked their hairlines into an oval. If a woman got tired of not having eyebrows after plucking them, she could make a pair from rodent fur. Sometimes their eyebrows stopped growing back after years of constant removal, and this was their only solution for hair. The ancient English were very serious about their favorite sport. Shrove-tide football, played in Derbyshire, England. There wasn't a limit to how many people could participate in a game, which would take over a town, and matches often ended in violence. Death was a major part of existence in the Middle Ages. People were concerned with making their own death as beautiful and peaceful as it could be. If their final moments were at hand, they tried to be free of despair, disbelief, impatience, pride, or avarice, and fill themselves with peace. When the Bible was mistranslated, it compared Jesus to a unicorn instead of an ox. This idea grew around the medieval art communities, and unicorns became a major subject in their work. Jesters were given the unique privilege to say pretty much anything. Whatever they said was ruled to be treated as jest, so some even gave their political opinions to their royal audience. Medieval chefs loved to experiment with different animal combinations during their meals. Helmeted cock was one of these meals. They sewed a rooster on top of a pig, so it looked like it was riding the creature. During the Feast of Fools in January, the upper and lower classes would switch places. A king of misrule was crowned during this raucous festival. There were parades, comedians, singing, and plenty of drinking. Another popular yearly tradition was the Festival of the Ass. A little girl would ride a donkey into a church during service. The churchgoers would then end all of their prayers in donkey noises instead of amen. This lasted until the Protestant Reformation. Flowers and roots were used for lipstick, especially in shades of rose or lily. These connoted a sense of purity, for the wearer didn't offend the church as much. As long as the color wasn't too bright, women could get away with wearing their homemade makeup. Another important female trend was being blonde. Angels were depicted as blonde, and women wanted to mimic this in their humanly forms. Once they achieved their desired shade, they wore opal necklaces to charm their hair into lightness. For those who wanted to go brunette, there were a few options. Women would cook roots and nuts and then soak their hair in the mixture. They would keep it in for 2 days before rinsing the solution. Moles, freckles, and birthmarks were associated with witchcraft at the time. There were a variety of ointments and home remedies for lightening or attempting to rid yourself of unsightly blemishes. Marriage traditions were much different in medieval Europe. When children reached puberty, they were ready for marriage, and weddings were often a major event with plenty of public interest. Audiences would ensure the couple properly consummated the event. Being pale was in during medieval Europe. Women would use blue ink to draw blue veins on their skin. There were also special powders to whiten their appearance. Their goal was to make themselves look almost translucent. One of the many diseases that ravaged Europeans was the King's Evil, a kind of tuberculosis that appeared in the form of oozing black sores on someone's neck. Until the 1700s, it was believed the only cure was the touch of a royal's hand. That wasn't an effective treatment. The church wanted to keep people pious and discouraged bathing, so they wouldn't be forced to look at their own nakedness. To keep away some of the body odor, women would hide spice sachets in their bosom and under their legs and arms. Right before the bubonic plague swept through Europe, a pope had warned that witches were using cats for magic, and so a bunch of jerks killed all the cats. Because of their cruelty, flea-ridden rats quite effectively spread the illness across the continent. Pope Stephen VI really hated Pope Formosus. In 897, Stephen dug up Formosus's body, put it on trial, found it guilty, and then cut off his index and middle finger, reburied him, and then retrieved the body from the fresh grave and threw it in the Tiber River. Can you imagine being there for that? What a wild ride. Need a break from the pressures of medieval life? Party at the cemetery. These served as early town halls and hosted events like elections, public trials, and even theatrical groups. Sex workers even frequented the area. For about 18 months, King Henry VI was in a catatonic state, and no one knows why. After waking up, he became much more agreeable, though sometimes he had trouble recognizing his staff members. No one's perfect. Besides the plague, there was also a terrible famine in the 14th century. From 1315 to 1317, 3 excessively wet summers ruined the crops in farmers' fields, and at least 10% of Europe's population starved to death. For some reason, people wanted to be remembered as putrid, decaying corpses. If someone's family had enough money, they would pay for an effigy of the dead person, which showed them as a rotting body. These medieval aesthetics, just no. People thought those suffering from mental health disorders were possessed by demons, immoral or terrible sinners. They solved these problems with exorcisms, whipping, drilling a hole in someone's head to release the evil energies. No, these didn't work either. Something surprising. Medieval Europeans didn't throw their chamber pot contents into the street. Instead, they used latrines or local bodies of water. We're not sure how modern researchers discovered this, but stay out of River Thames. Religion and government were heavily mixed at the time, so most Europeans had major hang-ups around sex. Experiencing sexual pleasure was a death sentence, so when Francesca Romana was forced to marry, she burned her genitals with boiling fat to take away any sensation. Europeans were fond of cruentation, the idea that a victim's body would spontaneously reveal who their slayer was. But this wasn't at all real. Cruentation was used until the late 1600s during trials, until the medical researchers proved that this was an impossible system for justice. In 1212, some genius had the idea to do a children's crusade, gathering children to try to convert Muslims to Christians instead. These child warriors made it to Italy before being betrayed by shop owners and sold into slavery. During the Battle of Hastings, the Normans were concerned with their field position and sent out a juggler to entice the Saxons to attack them. This worked. The Saxons had the high ground, but lost this advantage and the entire battle because they attacked the juggler. This is something straight out of Game of Thrones. King Edward III needed more soldiers to defeat the French army, so he and his team went around to prisons and sketchy areas to collect fighters. These were some violent people, but they got the job done. This is one of the nastiest facts out there, fair warning. Saints were supposed to have healing powers. They licked wounds. Sometimes they reported swallowing scabs or sucking out maggots. Shudder. If there's one thing medieval Europeans loved, it was torture. One method was the Judas cradle, right, which was a giant triangular spike a prisoner would sit on. The point only had one place to go. The Spanish donkey used a similar method. Another method used for torture was drawing and quartering, dragging the victim behind a horse, hanging them until they were nearly dead, disemboweling the person, and finally cutting or putting them in four. And let's not forget the choke pear. A torturer would insert this into the victim's orifice, dealer's choice, and then expand it. We're guessing the choke pear wasn't sanitized after being used. People died afterward, so that probably wasn't the top priority. There was also the iron chair. This is what it sounds like, an iron chair. The chair had sharp metal spikes that a prisoner sat on. They'd lived through this, but when they stood up, the spike popped out and their blood quickly followed. If you were going to be punished, hope for this. Occasionally, the guilty would have to wear a weird animal mask around town, or sometimes had to wear a special sign with their crime on it for the rest of their life.